The glass walls of Portland International Airport reflected back a family that was not really mine. My father strode ahead, rolling a sleek black suitcase. Celine, his new wife, walked beside him, her sunglasses perched high in her hair. Drew and Piper, her children, kept close behind, talking in low voices about resorts and snorkeling trips. I trailed last, clutching a modest carry-on that suddenly felt out of place among their polished luggage. At the check-in counter, Richard the agent in his crisp navy jacket stacked the passports neatly. I counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My stomach tightened. There should have been 6. Excuse me, I said, trying to steady my voice. What about mine? The agent scanned the screen, puzzled. I only see 5 passengers booked on this reservation. My father cleared his throat. Mariel, step aside for a moment. He guided me away from the line, his hand firm on my elbow. For a heartbeat, I thought he might explain, maybe apologize for an oversight. Instead, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a wad of bills, and pressed it into my palm. $200. You'll figure it out. His tone was casual, as if I had misplaced a homework assignment, not my place in our family. I stared at the money, the edges dampening in my clenched hand. You're serious? He gave a shrug that I would remember for the rest of my life. Mrs. Turner next door has a spare key. You'll be fine. Then he turned, rejoined Celine and her children, and disappeared with them into the security line. I stood rooted to the polished floor of Gate 24, the crowd pressing around me, my suitcase by my feet, while the boarding passes rustled like proof that I was already erased. Time at Gate 24 slowed into something unbearable. The departure board flipped letters, announcing flights for families who actually belonged together. I tried my father's number 3 times, then Celine's once. Each call slid to voicemail. Texts came back marked as delivered but never answered. My suitcase sat beside me like an accusation. By the second hour, I had run out of excuses to myself. Maybe they'd come back. Maybe this was a mistake. But the truth was clear: the trip to Fiji had always been meant for 5, not 6. I drifted to the food court just to look busy. A woman wiping tables stopped in front of me. Her badge read Angela. She studied my face, then set down a bag of pretzels. On the house. You look like you could use something. The kindness broke me open. I muttered thanks, fighting tears, and sat with the bag untouched. My phone battery blinked red. I scrolled through my contacts, the list thinning like a lifeline. Friends from Portland had faded after the move. Dad's side of the family was out of the question. And then I saw her name Mom. It had been more than 3 years since I'd dared call. She lived in Santa Fe, a desert city that belonged to another life. I hovered over the button, every muscle in me recoiling at the thought of her disappointment. But panic pressed harder. The phone rang once, twice, and then, hello. The voice was unmistakable, cautious, older than I remembered. I froze, words stuck in my throat. Who is this? It's me, I whispered. It's Mariel. A long pause, then a sound that might have been relief-breaking. Mariel, sweetheart, where are you at the airport? Dad left me here. Her tone hardened, all hesitation gone. Stay put, I'm coming. For the first time all day, I let myself believe I might not be alone. By the time Elena found me at the curb outside the terminal, dawn was beginning to blur the sky over Portland. Her old Toyota bore the dust of a night spent pushing past mile markers. She stepped out stiffly, scanning for me as though I might still vanish. When her eyes landed on mine, something flickered relief, guilt, hesitation. The hug she gave was awkward, not the kind that collapses years of distance. But I held on anyway. Neither of us knew what to say. So we didn't. I slid into the passenger seat, the smell of coffee clinging to the cup holder between us, and we began the long drive south. Hours of asphalt unrolled through Oregon and New Mexico, broken by silence, gas station stops, and her attempts at small talk. She asked about school. I mumbled half answers. I asked about her job at the gallery. She nodded, said it kept her busy. We were careful with each other, like people testing thin ice. Her house in Santa Fe was small, adobe walls the color of baked clay, with creaking floorboards that gave away every step. My room there had once been mine, years ago, though now it felt like a guest room hastily prepared. As I unpacked the little I had brought, I opened the desk drawers looking for space. That's when I found them. A stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band. Each one bore my name in familiar handwriting, my father's, birthday cards, holiday notes, even short letters filled with small details about his life. Some sounded warm, hopeful. Others slipped in subtle digs about Elena, urging me to remember who really cared. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Why had she never given these to me? Had he really tried? Or was this another performance meant to keep me tethered? I carried the bundle into the living room. Elena looked at them, her face draining of color. She reached for words, but stopped, as if afraid they would shatter between us. I realized in that moment I didn't know which of them had lied more, only that the truth was heavier than I was ready for. Elena didn't waste time. 2 mornings after I arrived, she drove me to a brick office building off Agua Fria Street where Judith Harlow kept her practice. Judith was a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair pulled back neatly, the kind of presence that made silence feel deliberate rather than awkward. She shook my hand, looked me directly in the eye, and said, "I'm glad you came." Elena laid out the envelopes I'd found, the cards and letters Dad had written. Judith examined them carefully before sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were fresh statements, an airline clerk's affidavit, a copy of my boarding record, and stills from the security footage at Portland International. There I was, standing alone at Gate 24 while my father moved on without me. Legally, Judith explained, this is abandonment. A minor left without supervision at a transportation hub is considered endangered. Child Protective Services will want to investigate. The words felt clinical, but their weight landed heavy. Abandonment. Endangered. Terms I had read in articles about other people now circled back with my name attached. That afternoon, a caseworker from CPS came by Elena's house. She asked gentle but precise questions, noting everything in a small tablet: what time my father left, how much money he gave me, whether he had arranged care in his absence. Each answer felt like another layer of paint on a portrait I didn't want hanging in any courtroom. But what unsettled me most wasn't the paperwork or the prospect of hearings. It was the ache that kept surfacing beneath my anger. Part of me still pictured my father walking back through the airport doors, saying it was a mistake, that he hadn't meant it. That part of me hated the evidence because it made forgiveness impossible. When the caseworker left, Judith assured us the law was on our side. Elena looked relieved. I felt split open, caught between proof of betrayal and a craving for the approval of the man who had caused it. I knew the next step would be facing him not as a daughter, but as a witness. With Judith's guidance and the paperwork filed, we drove north to Portland under legal clearance to collect my things. The highway felt endless, each mile pulling me back toward a house I no longer wanted to call home. Elena tried to make conversation comments about the landscape, questions about music I liked, but the silence between us always returned. We were bound together by necessity, not comfort. The Ashford house loomed at the edge of a manicured neighborhood, its windows glinting in the gray Oregon light. Unlocking the door with the key still on my chain felt surreal. It was my home on paper, but stepping inside felt like trespassing. The air smelled faintly of Celine's perfume, sharp and unfamiliar. I led Elena upstairs to my room, tucked at the far end of the hall. The door creaked as it opened. Compared to Drew's posters plastered across his walls and Piper's fairy lights strung above her bed, my space looked temporary, like a hotel room someone had stayed in too long. Neutral walls, a narrow bed, and a desk with little more than a lamp. No photographs of me hung in the hallway we'd passed. No trace that I belonged here. I began pulling clothes from drawers, folding them into boxes. At the bottom of the desk, I felt something catch a shallow drawer that stuck slightly when I pulled. Inside was a stack of envelopes, worn from years of being shoved aside. My name was written across each one in Elena's careful script. My breath caught. I tore one open. Inside was a birthday card from when I turned 12, bright with glitter but never delivered. Another envelope held a letter from her explaining why she had moved to Santa Fe, saying she wanted me to visit, that she still loved me. All of it hidden from me, tucked away where I'd never look. The room swayed as I sank into the chair. First, the bundle of Dad's letters concealed by Elena, and now this, Elena's words kept from me by Dad. Lies nested inside lies, both of them controlling which truths I was allowed to know. Elena stepped into the doorway, her face tightening as she saw the envelopes in my hands. I couldn't decide if I felt more betrayed by her silence or by his theft, only that I had never felt so split in two. We had finished loading the last box into the mover's van when I glanced back at the front porch. A bright paper was taped across the double doors, sealed with the state's crest. Judith had explained it would be posted as part of the protective order notification of the ongoing investigation and restrictions on my father's contact with me. It looked stark against the polished wood, like graffiti no one in this neighborhood expected to see. 2 days later, word reached us that my father and Selene had returned from Fiji. According to Judith, they had been met at their own doorstep, not with a welcome home, but with the notice. I pictured him reading the words, his face going red, while Selene's lips tightened into that thin, disapproving line she used whenever reality broke through her curated world. The first call came within the hour. He left a voicemail, his voice booming with fury. Mariel, how could you do this after everything I've given you? You've let her poison you against me. You're being ungrateful, vindictive. He spoke as if the abandonment at the airport had been an oversight, a lesson blown out of proportion, rather than the core of the matter. Selene tried her own angle. An email, carefully worded, dripping with concern. She wrote that the family was embarrassed, that the neighbors were already whispering, that it would be better for everyone if we handled this quietly. Her reputation was clearly more fragile to her than my safety. The cracks between them began to show through these messages. His anger burned hot, all about control and image, while hers trembled under the weight of social standing. For once, their voices were not united. I listened to both and felt a strange calm settle in. The notice on the door had done what I could not. It stripped away the illusion that they were untouchable. My father was no longer just the architect with the perfect life. He was a man whose own facade was beginning to collapse, and I knew the next confrontation would have to be face to face. The first therapy session with Elena took place in a quiet office tucked behind a bookstore off Canyon Road. The walls were lined with shelves of well-worn novels, and the therapist, Dr. Mendoza, had a voice so steady it felt like it could hold weight without judgment. Still, I found myself crossing my arms, unsure of how much I wanted to reveal. Elena tried, in halting sentences, to explain why she hadn't fought harder for me after the divorce. She admitted she had been afraid of my father's resources, of losing entirely. I heard her words, but they came wrapped in years of silence, and it would take more than a few sessions to untangle what was apology and what was regret. Dr. Mendoza asked me what I needed. The answer came clearer than I expected boundaries. No more decisions made over my head, no more secrets tucked into drawers. I wanted my life written in my own handwriting, not theirs. With Judith's help, I drafted conditions for my father. Any contact would be supervised. No private meetings. No late-night calls designed to wear me down. Financial records had to be transparent. No more pretending poverty while money changed hands behind my back. I signed the statement myself, the ink drying like proof that my voice mattered. Outside the legal battles, I started piecing together an ordinary life in Santa Fe. Elena helped me enroll at the local high school. its adobe-style campus so different from the sprawling halls I had known in Portland. I felt like an intruder at first, but slowly the rhythm of classes began to anchor me. In the afternoons, I picked up shifts at a cafe near the plaza. I wiped tables, poured coffee, and learned the names of regulars who asked about my day without expecting polished answers. Earning my own paycheck, however small, steadied me in ways therapy couldn't. It wasn't perfect. Trust with Elena was still fragile, and my father's shadow lingered, but each step felt like stitching a torn seam. The rules were mine now, written in ink, and I intended to guard them fiercely as the court date drew closer. The courthouse in Multnomah County smelled faintly of polish and paper, a mix of old wood and new authority. I sat beside Elena and Judith at the long oak table, my palms sweating despite the cool air from the overhead vents. Across the aisle, my father leaned close to his attorney, whispering as if this were just another project to negotiate. Celine sat behind him, immaculate as always, her expression unreadable. Judith began with the evidence. The still images from the airport camera. Frozen moments of me standing alone at Gate 24 while the rest of them crossed into security. Then came the affidavit from the airline clerk, confirming the count of 5 tickets. Witness statements followed, one from the airport worker who had offered me food, another from the CPS officer who had recorded my account. The judge turned to the financial records next. Copies of support checks traced back years, showing payments that never reached me. Alongside them were the letters my father's words describing birthdays, school events, attempts at contact, all tucked into a drawer I was never meant to find. The silence in the courtroom grew dense. When it was his turn, my father straightened, voice pitched with practiced warmth. He spoke of teen rebellion, of misunderstandings exaggerated by an emotional ex-wife. He insisted he had acted in my best interest, that the Fiji trip was meant to give me space to mature. His lawyer nodded along, framing it as discipline gone wrong rather than abandonment. Then the judge asked if I wished to speak. My throat tightened, but I stood. I told them what it felt like to watch my family disappear through security while I clutched $200. I told them how every hidden letter carved years of silence between me and the mother I thought had forgotten me. I said it plainly, this was not discipline, not rebellion, but abandonment. The judge listened without interruption. When the ruling came, it was clear. Full custody to Elena. My father would have only supervised visitation until further review. As the gavel struck, my father's face hardened, but I no longer flinched. For the first time, my words had been louder than his. I walked out of the courtroom knowing the next chapter of my life would begin in Santa Fe. When the court papers arrived, finalizing custody, I packed what little I had left and settled into Elena's adobe house as more than a guest. The room at the end of the hall, once bare and temporary, became mine. We spent a weekend repainting the walls a soft shade of blue, the color of clear sky after a storm. The scent of fresh paint clung to my hair, and for the first time in years I felt like the space around me belonged to me. Above my desk, I hung a frame with the boarding pass from Portland Gate 24, the day everything split open. It wasn't decoration, it was a reminder of what I had survived and what I refused to repeat. School in Santa Fe felt unfamiliar at first. Students clustered in groups that had known each other since childhood, and I hovered on the edges. But slowly, I found my way in. A girl named Lila invited me to join her study group. A boy in my history class lent me notes without being asked. Small kindnesses gathered into something larger, the beginnings of belonging. In the evenings, I opened a journal and began writing my story in pieces, snatches of memory from the airport, fragments of courtroom testimony, descriptions of the envelopes hidden in drawers. It started as a way to empty my chest of everything I had carried, but soon it shaped itself into something purposeful. A guidance counselor mentioned a scholarship essay competition, and I realized my story had weight beyond my own healing. Elena and I moved carefully around each other, but the old silence began to thin. She knocked before entering my room, asked instead of assumed. We weren't fixed, but we were trying. And for now, that was enough. 6 months later, the air in Santa Fe had settled into me like a second skin. On a Saturday afternoon, Elena and I walked along Canyon Road, drifting through galleries filled with adobe walls and light spilling across canvases. She lingered over landscapes, and I found myself drawn to pieces that used fragments of broken glass, art rebuilt from what had once been shattered. Back home, a small stack of letters waited on my desk. My father's handwriting was still precise, the ink deliberate. Each letter had been cleared through the supervised visitation program, each one written as though the past were a misunderstanding, as though I could be coaxed into remembering him differently. Sometimes I read them, sometimes I didn't. Either way, they no longer carried the power to unseat me. That night, after Elena had gone to bed, I stood in my doorway for a long moment before turning the lock. The click echoed in the quiet house. The key rested warm in my palm, not a barrier against her, but a symbol that the choice was mine. My space. My rules. I lay down beneath the blue walls, the framed boarding pass glowing faintly in the moonlight. My life had begun with other people writing chapters for me, deciding what I would know, where I would live, who I could trust. But the pages ahead were mine to draft. It was no longer about resisting him or even forgiving him. It was about building something that belonged only to me. And as I closed my eyes, I knew the story I was living was not against my father at all. It was for me.